The secrets of Dhruva and the northern stars. Far, far above the apparent positions of the planets are the sages, always at the edge of the worldly, orbiting the supreme location of Vishnu. So this statement from Bhagavata is drawing our attention up away from the planets, northward in the sky, towards the constellation that represents all of the northern constellations, the figurehead of all the constellations. The rishis are the sages. In modern astronomy, technically, it's called Ursa Major, or it's a part of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. But in common use, even amongst modern Western people, nobody talks about the Great Bear. Everybody talks about the Big Dipper. And that's exactly what the Bhagavatam is referring to here as the rishis or the sages. The reason why we refer to it as a dipper is because it looks like a spoon. And this comes from the ancient Vedic way of seeing this constellation as a ladle or a spoon for yagyas performed by sages. So the constellation is a sacrificial ladle, which is used by the 7 great sages who are the sons of Brahma. And each one of the 7 stars in the sage constellation is named after one of those sages. Kratu, Pulaha, Pulastya, Atri, Angiras, Vashishta, and Marichi. So the Bhagavatam describes the sages constellation as being always at the edge of the worldly, always at the edge of worldly experience, or always at the edge of what common people can see or experience. Why is that? If you look at the simulation of how the stars move in the sky, draw your attention to the horizon, which is this green line here, and trace a line of which stars do not fall below the horizon as they rotate. You get this circle called the circumpolar circle, which is equivalent to the Arctic Circle on the globe. And that circle passes exactly through the middle of the sages. The symbolism in here is quite straightforward and simple. The stars that never disappear from the sky are eternal. They represent the eternal world, the divine things, the supernatural things. And the other stars that do rise and set, those are the temporary ones. They represent the natural world or worldly things. The Big Dipper is right on the edge between the two. So it's at the edge of worldly experiences, at the edge of what common people are always able to see. And it's because of being on the edge between these two worlds that they are the rishis or the teachers or the leaders of humanity. Because they have one foot in one world and another foot in the other world. So they're able to experience things from the divine realm and transmit information about them to the ordinary realm. That's why we call them sages. The next thing the Bhagavatam says about the sage constellation is that it orbits the supreme locus of Bhagavan Vishnu. And again, that's obvious what they're talking about by looking up at the sky. Or it seems obvious, at least. Everything seems to be orbiting this central point at the apex of the sky, which is the paramount position of the supreme locus, the topmost part of the sky, which therefore is associated with Vishnu. And this location, this non-moving location, has hence been known as Dhruva, because literally the word Dhruva means constant, not changing, and also because it belongs to Vishnu, but he gave it to his friend, a little boy who loved him very much, named Dhruva. So this all seems quite simple and obvious and clear about what the Bhagavatam is saying about the sages orbiting Dhruva at the edge of what you can always see. But when you consider some other statements found in the Vedas and Itihasa, some confusion starts to arise. For example, the Maitrayaniya Aranyaka asks why Dhruva moves. Why does even Dhruva move? The idea is nothing in this world is permanent, but at least we have Dhruva, a permanent thing that doesn't change. But look, alas, even Dhruva changes. You also have references in other places like Mahabharata of Dhruva moving. So is this part of the sky really Dhruva, or does it somehow change over time? What's going on? How can something be unmoving yet moving at the same time? So we have this movement of all the stars around this central focal point, Dhruva. But what actually happens is that due to a phenomenon known as axial precession, that point that everything orbits around also itself moves in an orbit. And that orbit of this Dhruva point lasts 26,000 years roughly. This is what the ancients are talking about when they're saying that Dhruva moves. And so there are two ways of looking at Dhruva. One way is sidereally, or based on stars. Whatever point in the sky is not moving and around which everything else is moving, that's Dhruva. But over time, that point changes. So sometimes, like around today's time, it intersects a star called Polaris. 5,000 years ago, it intersected a star called Tuban. At some points in time, it almost intersects stars like Vega. It's very close to other stars. And so these stars or these locations may be thought of as Dhruva in a temporary sense. But the true Dhruva, the point that actually is the center of all the orbits of everything, is the center of this orbit of the centers. So we have two sorts of Dhruvas. We have a moving Dhruva, which is a sidereal Dhruva, and then we have an eternal Dhruva, the actual center of all the movement, which is a tropical Dhruva, because it is the northern ecliptical point, and the rotation of the other Dhruva around it is what accounts for the precession of equinoxes, the forward momentum of the tropical zodiac against the stars. So does this concept of an eternal Dhruva violate anything that we went over in the previous statement from Bhagavatam? No, actually, it fits perfectly well with it, and it explains something that would otherwise be problematic. So it starts off the same way. Far, far above the apparent positions of the planets are the sages, always at the edge of the worldly and orbiting the supreme location of Vishnu. The problem of looking at this statement with a sidereal temporary Dhruva is that at some points in time, the seven sages will not be on the edge of the visibility, that circumpolar circle. But with this concept of Dhruva as the tropical ecliptical pole, with this sidereal orbit around it, then you can draw the edge of the visibility zone around that orbit, and then you'll get the seven sages being exactly in the middle of that all the time throughout history. More importantly, does the Bhagavatam say anything else about Dhruva? Yes, in the very next statement. The very next statement in the Bhagavatam says that far above those seven sages, is the supreme location of Vishnu, named after Uttanapada's most blessed son, Dhruva. Next, it names stars that are in between the sages and Dhruva. Agni, Indra, Prajapati, Kashyapa, and Dharma. These stars orbit Dhruva clockwise as a unit with utmost obedience. Now that doesn't look clockwise, does it? But this is one of the very confusing things about spherical geometry. When you look up at Dhruva, the stars seem to be moving counterclockwise around it. But direction of movement is relative to the directional points. When you look at this very counterclockwise movement in relation to the horizon, it actually moves from east to south to west to north, or in other words, clockwise. So these four stars orbit Dhruva clockwise as a unit. That's also significant and means they form a constellation themselves. And this constellation makes a kind of serpentine shape. And in fact, we're going to find out it is referred to as a serpent. And it says that they orbit with utmost obedience, which implies that they don't have any independent movement of their own. They're not like planets. And it also implies that they always orbit. So now we have two very interesting Vedic constellations in the northmost part of the sky, the sages and the serpent, the rishi and the shishumar. Bhagavatam goes on to say, for as long as creation exists, these stars do this as they do even now. This is setting up the concept of there being two ways that the stars orbit Dhruva. One is in a short cycle, which is indicated by the phrase even now, which in Sanskrit is idanim api. Idanim api means in like a present sense. And then also there's kalpa jivanam ajivaya. the sense of it that lasts for the entire duration of the creation. So there's a short cycle of the Shishumar, and there's a long cycle as well. The serpent orbits Dhruva in a very short way and also in a very, very long way. The short way is just the daily orbit of the Shishumar around whatever point happens to be Dhruva at that point in history. Which, by the way, when Shuka was speaking to Parikshit in the Bhagavatam, was probably somewhere around where you see this crosshair, where there's no star visible. There's no star to take the role of a North Star where you can point at it and say, look, that's Dhruva. And that's part of the reason why he's saying even now, even when you don't see a star there, there's still a Dhruva. And the long cycle is the movement of that temporary Dhruva around the true Dhruva over the course of 26,000 years, or Kalpa. So just to give you a very quick, easy animation of what these kind of orbits look like, this is the short cycle that happens every day of the stars orbiting the contemporary Dhruva. And this is the long cycle that happens over the course of 26,000 years of Dhruva itself orbiting the ultimate Dhruva, the true Dhruva. Of course, you would have to have the stars orbiting around the contemporary Dhruva 360 times 26,000 times to actually get the full animation of what this looks like. But that would really become mostly a blur and get us all pretty dizzy. As I mentioned before, there are other texts which sometimes have more detailed information about particular astronomical things. For example, this constellation of the Shishumar, the serpent, is much more elaborately described in Taittiriya Aranyaka of Yajurveda. It names each one of 14 stars that are in the full constellation. So it says Dharma is the star that's at the head. Then Brahma is at the higher jaw or the upper jaw, and Yagya is at the lower jaw. Vishnu is at the heart of the serpent. Samvatsara is the lungs of the serpent. Ashvini, the two Ashvini are the two front legs. Atri is the stomach right in the middle of the serpent. Mitra and Varuna are the two hind legs. Agni is the beginning of the tail. Indra is the next part of the tail, the second one in the tail. Prajapati is the third in the tail. And the final star in the tail is called Abhaya. These stars together give a fuller picture of the serpent. Now you can see how this serpent surrounds Dhruva. And the very next statement in the Aranyaka is, Dhruva art thou who dwells forever here. You are the master of all the others. You are the best of them all. Their orbits all rest upon you. You are the boy child. This is very, very important statement because a lot of people have tried to place Dhruva as one of the stars of the Shishumar. But all of the 14 stars taken together reveal the location of Dhruva, which is very difficult to otherwise see because its location is only obvious over a course of 26,000 years. And another significant thing is that it names Dhruva the Shishu Kumara, the boy child. And the name of the serpent is the Shishumara, the child killer. So it's glorifying Dhruva as such a effortlessly powerful person, thing, or entity, that even something which is kind of naturally inimical to a child, a serpent, behaves and obeys the child and even protects the child. And don't forget that originally this Dhruva point is called Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam, because actually Dhruva belongs to Vishnu, but Vishnu loves Dhruva so much that he gives it to Dhruva and names it after Dhruva. Now, bearing that in mind, what you could see is that this northern ecliptical point, the true Dhruva, the tropical Dhruva, actually shows us Vishnu in the sky, and the Shishumar, which surrounds it, shows us Seshanag, who surrounds Vishnu and upon whom Vishnu rests in the cosmic ocean. Furthermore, you have the sages nearby with their ladle turned towards Vishnu, offering their sacrifices, offering their efforts towards Vishnu on behalf of everything which is on the other side of them, which is the whole worldly zone of the stars, and then finally down to the ecliptic, which describes all the karmas of human beings taking place here on Earth. So not only have we solved the mystery of what Dhruva really is and shown that it's a tropical phenomenon, not a sidereal phenomenon, but also we've revealed just how extensive the astronomical knowledge of the ancient Indians was. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, like it, give it a thumbs up, because I put out videos like this very regularly. And thank you so much for watching.